If you're not available for people to speak to you physically, you don't have proximity to your team, you're not making yourself known to the team, you're not going to get good feedback. Okay, so base level, just be there. Okay, you don't have to say something monumentally profound every time you see someone. And I think sometimes we're like, we're the leader. What am I going to say? You don't have to.
Welcome back to the Culture Base Podcast. I'm Dustin. He's Blake. We are the Culture Base, episode 75. It feels like a milestone, so I'm going to treat it like one because I can, because I'm a host. Episode 75, How to Foster Culture of Feedback. A little bit of a continuation of last week's episode on psychological safety. So if you missed that one, I would highly encourage you to go back and listen to that. Before we get into today's episode, I want to remind you at the Culture Base, we help leaders know what they're about, show where they're going, and develop scalable teams to get them there. If you're listening on an audio podcast platform, we would really appreciate a high rating, star, whatever it is, type of review. High five. That's right. We're already doing that. We'd appreciate a high five, a digital high five, if you will, on your audio podcast platform. And you can also give us that digital high five on YouTube as well. If you're watching, hello, we're glad you're here. We'd love for you to hit the thumbs up button. It's also a hand gesture. We're doing high fives. We're doing thumbs up. It's like hand movements. It's really calisthenics with Culture Base today.
My hands.
I don't know what to do with it. Thumbs up for like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you're notified every time we release new episodes and new content throughout the week as well. Let's see what else. You can follow us on Instagram, YouTube, and LinkedIn at The Culture Base, BASE. And you can find us online, the World Wide Webs, at theculturebase.com. And while you're there, go to theculturebase.com/resources and pick up your copy of the Scalability Playbook, our free ebook ready for you to scale your teams. You can get it at theculturebase.com/resources. There are a ton of other resources on there for you as well, including the best interview questions ever, a free PDF guide to help you ask really great interview questions, and Blake Bear's book in digital format, Uncultured. Pick that up while you're there as well. So today, Blake, we're going to talk about how to foster a culture of feedback, building sustainable feedback culture. Super, super important. Why is it important, Blake?
Yeah, so culture, we talk about all the time, is environment. Environment for growth, development, connection, right? This is what we're trying to build. The top 3 reasons people leave is not feeling appreciated, the inability to grow or perceived inability to grow, and then culture and communication is the third. All of those things require the ability to put the right seed into the ground, to get the right kind of produce that comes back. We have to be able to have a good feedback loop and a good fluid way for people to talk about things and say, you know what? We're having an issue here. I think we need to do this. Okay, great. Now, what are we doing? We're taking care of the culture. So not having a good feedback loop or having a good culture that values feedback is synonymous with spending all this time on a culture and then putting it in a dark room and expecting growth. Can't do that. We've got to have the ability to have this type of a feedback loop. The problem is, and I don't know how much you want me to go into this, because there is a lot of like, what is good feedback? You know, we're going to talk about that today. What is good constructive feedback, and how do we make sure that what we're saying is cutting through correctly? And then what does it look like when we have deconstructive feedback? But before we even get into all this, I just want to say that if you want to have this in your organization and you think it's important, and even if you don't, it is important, by the way, you must value something that it's really hard to value. You must value change. If you don't value change, which, by the way, is the only thing we're guaranteed, If you think, oh, I'm going to lock in the perfect company, and as soon as this company is in its mold, I will never have to touch it again. If you think that, then you don't know business, period. Change is the only guarantee we have in this life, and that's okay. Change is not a 4-letter word. It is not a bad thing. It is a good thing. Change is transformation. That literally broken down, it's going to the form beyond. Your organization is going to that next level. That's why we're talking about scalability. That's why we're diving into and think it is so important to have a culture of feedback. Because if you can't do that and you don't value change, you will not have a culture of feedback. Because anytime someone says, hey, I notice we have this issue over here. Oh, no. And this is where you have what they call sacred cows. Okay. Have you heard that term, sacred cows? Yep. Sacred cows are those things in organizations that nobody knows why necessarily they exist, or only a few people do. Or one person who has a lot of power in the organization says, we've got to do this, but it does not fit what you do. It does not fit. And so then anytime someone says, hey, or they feel like they can't say, hey, why are we still using paper for this when like people out in the field don't have paper at all? Like, we can't use this at all. Why are we doing this? We don't have ability to say that, then we're going to be stuck. Okay, change is going to happen. You have to value change. So I don't know if you have anything else to say before we get into the problem, but that's kind of what I wanted to hit.
No, I love it. Let's get into it. All right. So the problem with not having some really good, consistent feedback loops and creating this culture is that a lot of organizations will say, it's like, this is the time of year, right? So we're still in the first quarter of the year. Slowly, people and leaders and organizations are starting to drift away from their goals as something else, shiny new idea has popped up, right? But so they're super inconsistent right now. This is the time of year. February is the time of year to really put your money where your mouth is and say, no, we're going to be consistent with this because we said we're going to do this. And this is obviously no matter what your goals are, no matter personal, professional, whatever, but specifically in these feedback practices, you have to model it consistently. You have to execute the plan consistently. And that is a problem with that we see when we're helping organizations create these feedback loops. We talked about this a little bit on the last episode 74, and the psychological safety in the workplace. There's a lot of fear of giving or receiving feedback. So go back and listen to that episode. We're not going to spend too much time into that, but there's a lot of employees and leaders that will avoid those conversations because they're scared of it, right? It's just straight up fear. They don't feel safe. They have had negative past experiences, things like that, right? Also, the reason why a culture of feedback doesn't really bloom, if you will, is because there's poor feedback. Right. And we talked a little bit about this in the last episode, but you can't just say, well, this is bad. What does that mean? This is bad. That's bad feedback. This is bad feedback.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So you need to be, we've talked about this all the time. You need to learn to ask really great questions. It's the R with the follow W sound. It gets me. Great questions. Great questions are the key to great feedback. Language. I knew Blake would laugh at that. That's why I did it. Listen, and feedback is not a one-time event. It has to be a regular, consistent idea. Anything else that you would add to the problem there, Blake?
No, I was going to say the whole, like, it's just like the wife who is like, you never say I love you. And he's like, I said I love you once. Like, I said it that one time. Like, I listened in the past is never the response. Okay. Like, you listen.
I love it. All right, let's get into the solution.
All right. So the solution, we must implement a feedback first approach and framework, which means we have to model this. We have to create regular structured opportunities for feedback across every level. Okay. It's easy to think and I'm guilty of this a lot. It's easy to think your leadership team, they got it. It's okay. They were around each other enough. We've got it. No. Structured feedback time. Because then when you, instead of having all these reactive problems you're working at together, it's now becoming proactive in that way. So this is stuff like one-on-ones. This is stuff like anonymous surveys like we talked about in the last one with Office Vibe. This is, we do what we've talked about as Notes Day. I cannot suggest that enough. You want good feedback, get a whole group of people, which are creating safety in numbers there, by the way. Get a whole group of people to say, hey, here's what we think. Here's some stuff that's going on. Let's get innovative here. Yeah.
Let's do this, Blake. I'm going to call an audible here real quick because your Notes Day that you guys use at your company, I think, is really a key solution to this problem. Let's scrap the rest of our notes here under the solution and just talk to us for a second about Notes Day. What is Notes Day, and how do organizations implement that?
Yeah. So Notes Day, we usually have is an everyone on deck meeting where we all get together for, it's usually 3 to 4 hours.
How often?
Once a quarter. Okay. So we'll come in once a quarter. Yeah, that's probably going to be the best scenario here. Ask me questions about it. But
I like where this is going. You ask, I give the answer. I like this kind of back and forth thing. What do you call that?
You called an audible and then put yourself on mute. That's not okay.
I'm sorry.
I'm just kidding. So no, I agree with this. So when we get in there, the first thing we do is we look at what happened. So we're taking that first part of that time to look at our past Notes Day as a discussion and say, okay, let's look back. Here's what happened. Last Notes Day, we talked about these things and we did this and this and this. We attacked these things. Here's the outcome. How much do we not postmortem what we talk about? And feedback has to have a full completion loop, right? So it's like, I'm an electrician. A circuit is what they call as a completed loop. So it has to have 2 points in order for that connection to be made. You take one lead off, it doesn't work. Okay. No power happens there. So what we're trying to do here is complete a loop, having a feedback loop. So we will talk about the last time. Here's what happened. Here was the success rate. And then we'll start asking more questions to it. So we kind of have that, what worked, what didn't work, what will we keep, what do we scrap? Okay. So we go through that framework pretty quickly and say, all right, great. Then we say, based off this last quarter and all the change we've had in this last quarter because of environmental things, because of cultural things, because of things we implemented last quarter, what are we going to do? Like, what do we think are the most important things we need to talk about? This is a time of innovation. And that's where, like, a lot of what we talked about with feedback is about problems, but what innovation is a solution to a problem, right? And so we're trying to grow in that innovation time too. So if you want good feedback to get good innovation, that's why you're doing this. So we will say, all right, let's sit down. What do we think our top problems are? Let's just throw a whole bunch. We call it splatting. You just throw a whole bunch of things on the wall and see what sticks. We throw a whole bunch of things up there and people are just like, hey, this was one of those issues. Hey, here's a creative idea to take care of this. And we just get it all on a whiteboard. Okay, so I've got 50, 60 people in this room and we're just throwing these things on the wall. Then we'll say, okay, what are the most important? Like, what do we think the top things here are that we should break into smaller groups and really attack here? Okay, because remember, I talked to last episode about our extroverts and our introverts and how they will give feedback or not give feedback differently. We like to get smaller groups because we're getting more laser focused feedback without politicking. You have one voice that's really loud in an organization who speaks a lot and then possibly says, oh, no, but I think we should talk about this. And then you're like, yeah, but what about this? And they're like, but I think we should talk about this. And you're like, yeah, I heard you the first time. They're like, I think you should talk about this. And you're like, all right, listen, that's a politicker. They're trying to get what their opinion is and what they're pushing right there. And that's, you don't need that. So getting into these smaller groups is important. Once we've identified usually 3 things, we'll go through, we figure out the top 3 things that we want to attack in a quarter. As an organization, that's a heavy lift still. Okay. Because these tend to be behavioral changes. Who here actually thinks behavioral changes are easy? Nope. They're challenging. So 3 is probably more than enough. So what we'll do is break off into our groups. And in those groups, we start having discussions around those three things. And we start saying, what are good ideas? And we're going around the group. And when you have structure and you don't go, what does everyone think? Instead, you go, hey, Dustin, I want you to think about this because I am going to come back to you to ask you what you think about this topic.
That's really good. That's good for your thinkers in the room, right? Because there's a lot of, just go back to the Enneagram thing, right? There's a lot of Enneagram 5, 6s, 7s, even sometimes where you just kind of give them a heads up if you want to get some decent feedback from them. So that's really good. Anything else that you would tell us about Notes Day? But I want to get into the action steps next, and specifically what are some steps that leaders can take to implement Notes Day immediately. And then I want to talk about some stuff from the team perspective really quick. So let's get into the solution. No, we just did the solution. Let's get into the action steps. That's just for you, man. Just for you. I'm leaving it in.
Oh, you should. That was awesome.
I'm leaving it in.
Okay.
Action steps, Blake. That's what I said. Everybody knows what I said.
So action steps. If you're trying to implement this,
if you're listening to this on audio, it just sounded the same to you. I didn't even make it. But on YouTube, there's those little things that pop up when you hear that little chime, like turning the page. Yeah. And they say different things. So just for the listener, I don't want to exclude our listening audience, as you were.
Yeah. So if you're trying to implement this, I think in order to value it, you need to make it consistent. That's almost more important than it even being good. Like the more consistent something is, the more you can refine it and make it good. Okay. So what's that?
Repetition.
That's right. So as far as getting into the Notes Day, it's just set up a time, go in, do the things I talked about. Make sure you close the loop though. So after those groups usually meet, what we do is we set the plan. And the plan is, here's how we're going to hit these things. Here's all the feedback we're getting. And now we're going to move forward with the plan to take this on. Leaders, nobody will do feedback well if you aren't available. If you're not available for people to speak to you physically, you don't have proximity to your team, you're not making yourself known to the team, you're not going to get good feedback. Okay. So base level, just be there. Okay. So you don't have to say something monumentally profound every time you see someone. And I think sometimes we're like, we're the leader. What am I going to say? You don't have to. I think people respect dummies all the time. I'm a good example of it. Walk out and I'm just like, hey, what y'all doing? And they're like, hey, how's it going? And then you can get into real talk when it needs to happen, but you don't need to try to force that. Okay.
Yeah. Love it.
Yeah.
I would say for team members, this thought came to mind as we kind of wrap up this episode. For team members, I think something difficult is the thought that, well, they didn't ask for my opinion or they didn't ask for my feedback, so I'm not going to give it. That is the worst attitude to have. If you want to have a culture of feedback and a culture of safety and teamwork and scalability, you have to practice giving the feedback. And number two, on the other side of that, you have to also actively seek feedback from your leaders and your peers. Feedback is a two-way street here. You can't give it without being okay receiving it, and vice versa. You have to practice both sides of it. If you as a team member constantly go up to your boss and say, I have some feedback for you, but then when they have feedback for you, you brush it off, they will never listen to your feedback.
Yeah.
They will never listen to your feedback because you don't listen. So practice as much as you are at giving good feedback, practice receiving that feedback as best as well. Anything as we close up this conversation, Blake, I think that's probably the biggest thing for team members. Yeah. Awesome. Well, next week, we're going to be back with you, episode 76. Not quite as monumental, but we're still climbing the ladder, folks. Just ride the wave with us. We're going to talk about creating inclusivity. Did I say that right?
That was
inclusivity.
Good. You did it.
I look at that word and I don't know what to do. I just go, there's a lot of letters in there. It could go any way here with the emphasis, but creating inclusivity strategies for some diverse teams. That's what it's about. You can't have a bunch of U's running around. You got to have diverse teams. So we're going to get into that next week, episode 76. And remind you can find all of our free resources and contact us at theculturebase.com. We look forward to being with y'all next week. Have a great week. Talk to you then.